That's the one. All right, so I am going to call to order the first official meeting of our early childhood data roadmap work group, and it is 9:04. I want to sort of officially welcome us to whatever it is that we're about to embark on, but I'm really excited both about the agenda and the purpose. We have some unfamiliar faces among us, and so I just thought we could do a quick round of introductions to just say your name and your title in the organization that you are connected with, and then we will dive in more specifically to our meeting. So I'll start. I'm Sarah Abrahams. I serve as the Deputy Chief Officer for Prevention and Early Intervention at the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. And Kirsten, you are right below me on the screen, so I'll punt to you.
Okay, Kirsten Schwab. I'm the Executive Director of Texas PBS. So we are the PBS stations for the state of Texas. And I will go to Stephanie Rubin.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Rubin, the CEO of Texans Care for Children, and David Fagan will most often serve for us on this work group, but I'm taking his place today. Thank you. Laura, maybe? Why don't you go ahead? Hi, Laura.
Hi, my name is Laura Varnell. I'm with Primrose Schools. I'm the Director of School Training for our Primrose Support Center. We support over 450 schools nationwide. About 150 of those are in Texas. I'm also part of the ECEC work group for the state of Texas, and then the legislative chair for the TLCCA Association.
And
Kim,
Kim,
go next.
Oh, April, perfect. April, you go.
Okay, April Crawford. I'm the co-director of the Children's Learning Institute at UT Health, and I will pass it to Howard.
Morning, everyone. My name is Howard Morrison. I'm an early childhood TA specialist at the Preschool Development Grant Birth to 5 TA Center with SRI International, and the TA specialist that's supporting Texas and the early childhood data roadmap work.
And I'll go. My name is Kim Coffrin. I'm the Director of Early Childhood Education for Children at Risk. And Chelsea?
Morning, everyone. I'm Chelsea Moore. I'm the Early Childhood Data Policy Analyst at the Texas Workforce Commission, and I'm going to be helping to support you all in facilitating some of this moving forward. So look forward to working with you all.
Thank you. And Megan, I don't know, can we count that as our roll call? Or do we have to say here formally?
I think we can count that as our roll call.
Fantastic. So we're gonna break the rules a little bit this morning already, but we are producing this meeting as a Zoom webinar. So our council members, presenters, and agency staff are participating as panelists, but members of the public are able to participate in listen-only mode until we get to the public comment portion, and we'll talk about that in a second. Please state your name before you speak, just so that we have it on the record. There is the opportunity to submit public comment closed at 5 yesterday, but members of the public are still able to request to provide oral public comment today by emailing their request to Megan Schneider, and she's going to put the instructions in the chat. And then there aren't any minutes because this is our first meeting, so we have no minutes to approve from the previous meeting, and we've already decided and declared who's here and done this initial introduction. So do we want to go over the agenda really fast, and then we'll dive in? Oh, here we go. So we've done our call to order. We're going to talk a little bit about what is an early childhood integrated data system, why we're taking this roadmap approach, and what this group is supposed to do. Megan is going to share some examples from other states. We're going to show the drafted purpose and goals from the Texas Early Learning Integrated, like what the Texas Early Learning Council sort of approved as our initial purpose and goals overall. And then we're going to talk more specifically about stakeholder engagement. I think that's a really critical component of what this work group will do. We'll take public comment, and then we'll talk about the next meeting. This is our work group. So we'll talk a little bit about what we'll do, but essentially this is our working core. So what is an early childhood integrated data systems, or ECIDS, in our world of acronyms? That's sort of the way that we've generally said it. I will say that lots of states have tackled this in lots of different ways. So we have, and I know Megan is going to share some specific examples, but essentially it is a way of connecting, in many cases, the many agencies across the state that support and offer services to young children and their families, and offers a way for us to look at data across those services and agencies. It can help states integrate, layer, combine data across programs to help better understand how things are working, what the outcomes are, in some cases to track sort of longitudinal data and outcomes across multiple systems, to understand how families flow through the system. Essentially, the roadmap that we are being tasked with, or that the TLC is being tasked with producing, and we are going to provide some specific recommendations around, it will include that. It will help focus and our discussion around what data exists across the various systems at a high level, and what types of policy questions we'd like to be able to answer that we can't currently. So for example, we can't currently answer the question, how many unduplicated children are served across all our programs? We can't answer that question because we don't have a way of connecting that data across our services. Let me think, did I catch everything already on this slide? I think we can go to the next slide, Megan. So as a part of the Texas Early Learning Council's strategic plan, there is a specific goal in the strategic plan around this exploring and implementing a strong coordinated system around data. And we have these two very specific targets that are linked in our strategic plan. One, by 2025, Texas will have an early learning integrated data system that meets the needs of policymakers, families, and providers. And by 2025, Texas's early learning data system will link data points related to kindergarten readiness and other transition indicators from and across the early learning system. It's a very ambitious set of goals. And I think part of what we're trying to do is define exactly what that would look like, what is possible in the short term, and what some of our goals may be more long term. I'm reading my notes to make sure that I've covered all the components of that. Okay, so I think we can go to the next slide then, and then I'll go through this part and then we'll take questions, I think. So the makeup of, so this core group, essentially what we're tasked with, and our group is made up specifically of members of the Texas Early Learning Council or their designee. We are going to discuss the draft purpose and goals. So the TELC together created and drafted a set of purpose and goals for a Texas ECIDS. Our purpose is to help develop an overview document. So maybe a one-pager or some other kind of visual description describing the effort to create this kind of roadmap. We're going to specifically establish goals for stakeholder engagement. And that's in part because the goal of an ECIDS, an integrated data system, is not just to exist for its own sake, but to purposely be able to answer questions, to be able to address planning or strategy or family community questions about how we're doing around early childhood services and policies. And so in order to do that in a way that's useful, we really want to engage the folks that might use that data or might provide that data or might be impacted by that data to ensure that we are creating a roadmap that makes sense for Texas. We're going to develop sort of a readout or an initial analysis of what we heard as we engage with some of those stakeholders. And we're going to try to identify key policy questions that we might want a data system like this to answer. And that's essentially the roadmap that we're tasked with. So we are not tasked with trying to figure out how to connect all this data. We're not tasked with trying to figure out how much it's going to cost. We're not tasked with trying to figure out sort of the details or logistics about what specifically would have to happen in order to move that system forward. That would really be the next step. We're really just trying to articulate some guardrails and definitions around what an ESID like this might look like based on active engagement with our stakeholder community. I want to pause and just see if there are any questions, or Megan, if there's anything that I missed before we go into examples from other states.
Can I ask a question about the goals? This is Stephanie Rubin from Texans Care for Children. So I love the planning aspect of it, and we're going to be thoughtful group, I know. In the meantime, there may be initiatives, data system upgrades, grants to do some data integration that are going to happen, contemporaneously with our work that might come up in the next, 6 months or something. And it just strikes me that if that happens, it might be good to, from the agencies participating in this work group, to kind of share that opportunity to make sure that there's some thought into how to make sure that application or that data work is as coordinated as possible. So we suddenly aren't, 2 years down the road and we've, of course, missed the opportunity to affect some big opportunity that already passed by. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if the agencies are doing some work now and could use this group, I guess, as feedback or thought partners, it might be a good opportunity to do that. Does that make sense?
Yes, I see what you're saying. I'm not sure that this group is set up to provide feedback to other existing data integration projects, but I think it's certainly something we can offer up to state agencies. But I think, Stephanie, to your point, one thing that in developing sort of our one pager or in developing a little bit of the recommendations around the roadmaps, I think it would be really important for us to identify where there may be already existing or already developing initiatives or strategies that are doing some part of this. So at least we have it all captured in one place.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Right.
So I think
that could include our school readiness dashboard that might help answer some questions too.
Yeah, that's a great point. So maybe we can add that even as a part of our charge, or maybe a sub charge to our ESIDS one pager that we can incorporate or at least identify where there may be other kinds of projects that are tackling some component of what we're working on.
And Sarah, just for clarity, when we think about early childhood data, we're really talking about where the children are, not so much like where the workforce is, if it's childcare or if it's ECI, or I'm just trying to make sure we have our focus narrow or broad.
Yeah, I don't know that that's been decided, Kim.
Okay.
And I think that's a really good point. And I would say something for us to consider in our recommendations along, and I think we even have sort of a third bucket, which is the children themselves, the workforce that supports the services that are provided to them, and then their parents and caregivers.
Right.
Right.
Totally,
And
yeah.
so I think there is some room for us to think about what that might look like and how we might recommend
Okay.
data around all of those folks that are a part of providing services and supporting young children get included in this integrated data system.
Great. Okay.
All right. So Megan, do you want to, I'm going to turn it over to you, I think, and you're going to talk through some of the public facing portals from other early childhood integrated data systems from other states.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you so much. I'm going to pop in the chat the 2 examples that we're going to talk about, and they're from Minnesota and Georgia, which is good timing because one of our attendees was just commenting on the chat about the Georgia system. And so this is, let me pull this over and make sure y'all can see it. Do you see an internet browser instead of a PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Great. So this is just to give a flavor for when we talk about early childhood integrated data systems and what that might mean. Like Sarah mentioned, lots of different states have done this and have early childhood integrated data systems up and running. For some, it's a smaller point-to-point kind of data sharing. For others, it's a whole fully networked system. And usually that happens over the course of multiple phases, right? So you start somewhere with a couple systems and then slowly add on to it. These are a couple examples of states that do have more comprehensive type systems. These didn't happen overnight. They slowly built up to what they have today. And it's just to give a quick flavor of what that can look like and the public facing aspect of that. So to start with, what you'll see here is the Minnesota Early Childhood Longitudinal Data System. So that is the first link in the chat I shared. I'm not going to do a comprehensive walkthrough. I just wanted to point out that it is one example to look at. I would encourage you to poke around. They have some great information about behind the scenes, kind of how this came about and what data is included. I will take us down here to a section called Nourishing Our Children for Success. So this is just one facet of the broader set of reports that they have available that allows a user to drill down to services, demographic information about children, who participated where, et cetera. And so just to show how Minnesota has structured this, at least in this one portion, you do have the ability to, gives some summary level data at the top, and then you do have the ability to drill down by county or school district or legislative district. And look, in this particular graph we're seeing, this is all about demographics of children who participate in the various different early childhood programs. But again, they have lots of different angles of that information. So that's one quick 2-minute overview snapshot, and then wanted to show you Georgia as well. So Georgia calls theirs the Cross-Agency Child Data System, and they have similar setup, different pieces inside, but similar ability to report out on how many children are using the different services, and the ability to say whether that is an unduplicated count, so how many children are using a single service, 2 services, 3 services, et cetera, and how many children are receiving out of those who are eligible, and then the ability to customize those reports. So that's my quick run through. That is by no means meant to be comprehensive, but wanted to, as we get further into the weeds and talking about early childhood integrated data systems, wanted y'all to see how a couple of those have panned out, and would encourage you to check them out yourselves. And then we also, skip to my next slide, gave a couple other examples if you want to look around some more. So Utah and North Carolina as well. And I will pass it back to you, Sarah.
We will, at the next meeting, we will be having a quiz to ensure that you've gone in and looked at each of these early childhood data systems. So just be prepared for the beginning of our next meeting. I think
and
we
I
go.
did. I'm sorry. I wanted to make one point I meant to make. This is not to say Texas is going to go and build something like what we just looked at, but we are exploring what would the right places to start be? What would the right questions be to start asking up front to work towards something like that potentially? So Thank you.
All right, do we want to go to the ESID's purpose and goals? Okay, so this is really, this set of purpose and goals is not necessarily to drive our work group only, but was really set to begin to explain what we thought an ESIDS might be or look like in Texas. This was meant, the idea was to have something on paper before we started the roadmap work, just so that we could have a path carved a little bit. This was shared with the Texas Early Learning Council meeting in September, and it was generally positively received, and we didn't get any changes or edits from any of the TELC members. That doesn't mean that we can't make changes now or suggestions, but this is really meant to sort of be the overall guide to our work. So essentially our purpose is, through collaboration across and within agencies and programs, a Texas ESIDS would provide an integrated and aligned approach to enable Texas to make informed decisions about programs and policies that promote positive outcomes for young children and their families. We believe that an early childhood data would lead to better insight into how early childhood services are utilized. So that's a little bit about the unduplicated count and how kids and families come and flow through these services, improve decisions regarding the use and refinement of early childhood programs, clearer information for stakeholders and policymakers, and generally better outcomes for kids and families. And what we think we would use the data for, and this is really to help set some context as we think about what are the questions we want to answer, or what are the questions we need to ask. We want to use the data from this integrated kind of system to identify bright spots. So where are things going well? Where have folks figured out? Where are systems working smoothly? Where are families organically flowing through systems in ways that are healthy for them and that are sustainable at the community level? Identify gaps or deserts in services, identify underserved populations, identify opportunities to align program and services, identify where early childhood services correlate with child progress and key metrics. And this one is a complicated one, we know, but there may be some initial questions that we can ask about what impact we're having. Inform coordination across programs, and in general, and for anyone who's worked with me on one of these work groups before knows that this is one I always slide in, because I think part of the power of data is to help us tell the story in Texas about how we are collectively investing and supporting kids and their families, and where there may be additional need for investment or focus. So that's sort of how we've initially outlined. I sort of want to note the distinction before we have a discussion between this effort and the school readiness dashboard that Texans Care and Stephanie and her team is helping to drive, which is utilizing existing data. Which is that I think the distinction is that we are focused on, hold on, let me make sure. That the school readiness dashboard is working right now on developing a specific tool, a publicly facing dashboard that would combine publicly available data and even to potentially address needs for not publicly collected or not existing data right now. This roadmap that we're developing is not a specific tool. We're talking about potentially combining or aligning child level data across programs, but we're also really just trying to identify at this point, what are the questions as a Texas system do we need to answer and ask? We're going to focus on research and policy questions that we can't currently answer. So really talking about how to identify those with the ultimate goal to think about how do we create a system that will answer those questions. But the first, in some ways, the dashboard is really is jumping right into creating a tool, and we are we are starting a little farther back by really envisioning what are the questions that we need to answer to get, I think, in order for us to be able to focus and divert or prioritize state agency resources into the development of something like this, we want to be really clear from the very beginning about what it would take, what it would look like, what the definitions are. So that is part of how I'm distinguishing that difference. And Stephanie, if there's a different way that you want to articulate the difference between these two kind of parallel but connected projects, then I think we're still working on some of those distinctions, but that was my take.
Yeah, and thank you for that. We are hoping, we're in the process of developing this interactive dashboard that is not going to measure school readiness at the child level, but really looking at more holistically the supports and system, the supports that are available to parents and kids in the early childhood years to, help reflect across systems whether kids are getting all they need to be healthy and ready for school. So it's going to be, kind of data from the health system, poverty rates, obviously access to early childhood, some measures that are a little bit more outcome-based that are about parent-child interaction, social emotional development. So it's a combination of things. We're in the process of developing it. It will be interactive. The main audience will be state policymakers and community leaders. And so we're happy to keep people posted on that. We are working with Cynthia Osborne's team now at the PN3 Policy Impact Center to align with the data they already collect on some of these same measures. So, and a lot of that data are national census data. Not as much of it is Texas specific, but there is some. And as you mentioned, like in some cases, we don't have very good data, and that's okay. We're gonna outline where those gaps are so we can make a policy case for collecting it better. So thanks. I attached a short explainer document in the chat for people. My one question, Sarah, on this is, because this is a question a lot of us have for, in the childcare space in particular, but I think in other programs too, is how is quality being measured? How is performance being measured at the state level? And in some cases, that's what's reported to the federal government, like in ECI, or it could be, like Texas Rising Star or other things, but it might just, I know we didn't put that as one of our goals, but we have better insight into how early childhood services are utilized. We might want to just think for ourselves about making sure we're looking at the data on how we're measuring quality.
Great, thanks for that addition. Any other questions or additions or, yeah, April?
Hi, I've got a question. This is April Crawford. I'm trying to just get a sense of, I don't even know if I'm going to describe this in a way that makes sense, but there's sort of data systems and integration work that's intended to actually improve like real-time current programmatic coordination and alignment and family-facing coordination and alignment. So the data that's coming out of that system, it's actually a functioning part of workflows for the agencies that are delivering services. So you would imagine, yeah, so that's like one way to think of a data system that's sort of enabling the work, and yes, of course, there's data that can be drawn off of that system that's historical, but it's a real-time system. So you're creating things like shared or unique identifiers that run across programs in an effort to both improve like current service delivery to individuals. And then there's sort of data system that's like, okay, it's all historical data. We found a way to link this information. And, maybe it's a one time a year push of data. Maybe it's a procedure that runs every night, lots of different decisions you can make about that. But it's truly like a historical repository of information that people can use strictly for reporting. It's not intended to sort of strengthen and improve current system alignment and coordination.
Yeah.
What are y'all aiming for between those two?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think an important distinction. So my understanding is that right now, what we're being tasked with and what's kind of on the table is more of that systemic historical reporting perspective, and not the child level specific sort of real-time workflow relevant data. It's not that that's not important or something that should be tackled, but in terms of what this work group is tasked with, it's really the second example that you gave.
Sounds good.
But I do think, April, to your point, that we should articulate clearly and distinguish that there are these two kinds of integrated data systems, and really define and explain what this is and what it's not.
Yeah.
Because I do think it could be confusing.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments about just our overall purpose and goals?
I have a question, but I don't know if it's about the purpose and goals.
Sure, great. I'll take it.
So, and building off what April just said, so if it is that are using that historical data point, I think at some point it would be helpful for at least for me to know what is currently out there and what we currently have. I know we're not going into the house. I don't know, like, what I'm thinking of childcare by the numbers on the TWC side for our TRS. Like, we know that exists, but what else is missing, or what else is the next iteration of that, and how does that then connect? Like, what does ECI have that I'm not as familiar with, or what does TEA have, or what does childcare licensing have? Like, what is currently there, just to help spur ideas, not necessarily to say that's it, but just to help figure out what's
Yeah,
It
current
sounds
there
data
or what
map.
isn't there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like what you're talking about is a bit of a data inventory. So what data, especially publicly available data, but in
Correct.
general, at the agency level around these programs and services, what data exists right now? And so I will say there are, to sort of the point that we talked about earlier about making sure that we're capturing the connected but not us work efforts around this issue. There are a couple of groups right now that are really diving in deeply to that kind of data inventory. And so I do think that that would be, to your point, a really important way of thinking about, like, as we think about what are the questions we want to ask and what's missing, sort of being able to think about what exists right now would be really important. And Megan, I don't know, I feel like we've talked about a couple of different kind of inventory-like projects that are in motion right now. And I don't know if that's something that we can share today, or if it's something that we want to just make sure we have ready to talk more about in our next meeting.
Yeah, I think that'll be a great topic. We'll hopefully have more details by the time this group convenes again, and we can talk about the scope of what a data landscape or data inventory might look like to help feed this effort.
Because I think you're exactly right. We kind of need to know what's already there so that
Right.
we can, so yes, so let's say yes to that, and then maybe we can move it to our agenda for next month so that we
Perfect.
can dive into it together. Okay.
Great.
I'm curious, can we just, are we able to ask questions now, or?
Yeah, great.
So, I noticed that these different states organize this data in with different jurisdictions in mind. So whether it's school districts or counties, have we discussed how that might fit into this roadmap? How this data is organized, and do we want to sort of align with that for Texas?
I mean, I don't think we've talked about it yet, but I do think that it would need to be part of the roadmap recommendations that we make. I think that may in part be based on some of what we hear from stakeholders in terms of how they anticipate using the data, or what kinds of questions folks feel like they would use the data for. But I think to your point, being able to slice and dice data by legislative district, by school district, by zip code, by community, how are we defining some of those things? I think trying to figure out how to do that well is part of making sure that the data is going to be used by the folks that are trying to answer the questions with purpose. And so it may be a part of our roadmap recommendations that we not only identify all the ways that you could categorize and slice and dice, but potentially to prioritize based both on our experience and what we hear from stakeholders, where if we can't do it all, where do we think most of the questions are? And where, how, in what way does slicing and dicing this data, how would we prioritize that in such a way so that we're really able to do some of the things we want to do with the data? So I think we might just think about including both an articulated list and potentially some recommendations around priority as a part of our report back to our council.
And then Sarah, for the inventory, I think we'd want to put one of the tabs in there, you know, how granular does the data get? Does it get to the county level? Does it disaggregate by race or ethnicity or other factors?
Yeah,
so,
that definitely complicates the layered approach.
Right.
When the data isn't all collected in the same ways or around the same kinds of jurisdictions.
Right. Some data is collected by region, by like healthcare region or by workforce board region or something like that. So
yeah, it definitely makes for a complex mapping. Any other questions before we jump to some of the stakeholder engagement next steps? Okay, well, why don't we dive in there? I know it's always very difficult when we only have an hour together and there's so much to talk through. So one of the tasks of our group really is to figure out, is to reach out and include and involve and listen to the data needs of folks across many of our networks and communities. This is really a process to involve groups that both contribute data to the system and want data from the system. So we really need to ask questions of both kinds of participants. And we think that doing this right now is pretty critical to the roadmap development, both because it promotes this broader awareness about what is it that we're working on and why would we do it. But it also just ensures that we're developing a roadmap and making recommendations that considers the needs of both sets of participants. So we're going to talk a little bit about the assumptions that we're making around this group work, just to sort of set some guardrails and parameters for what it is that we might do and both how we might capture this data and then what do we do with it in terms of reaching out to other networks. So one is that we've shared this initial idea and the intent to develop this roadmap with each of our state agency leaders. And I think we're hoping that the roadmap will really be used to lay the groundwork for a more prescribed and sustained investment across the state, which is what will be necessary in order for us to manage all the behind the scenes details, logistics, and systems work that's going to be required to make something like this actually happen outside of a concept. We've agreed that stakeholder engagement is critical. We want to give a lot of opportunities to provide input. But the Texas Early Learning Council is going to be the main conduit for that stakeholder engagement. So we would work alongside the TELC to identify who, how, and when to engage stakeholders. And the idea is that at the end of this, we would develop some kind of set of recommendations or some overview that we've discussed about how to get started and what we've learned for state agency leadership review and consideration regarding the pursuit of this interagency project, this data project, as a collaborative effort. Let me also just say that this is intended to be an exploratory process. So we're not making decisions right now. This group, part of what our job is to really define what the stakeholder engagement looks like, what questions we'll ask, how we'll get that information, if we want to do some kind of survey, or if we want to make some calls or hold some listening sessions, or I think there's a lot of avenues for collecting data, including diving into some work that's already been done through the school readiness dashboard, through these other groups that have begun pulling together data inventories. So we definitely want to build on work that's already happened and add to it rather than start from scratch. Megan, is there anything I should add to that overview?
No, I'll flip through. There's a couple more slides that kind of cover this.
Great. So this just lays out very high level who we're anticipating engaging, the how. So I talked a little bit about that. And then really trying to dive deeply into, for the folks that we're talking to, are they contributing or are they receiving? How do they use the data? What is their function? What is their connection? Are they already blending data like manually and using it for some purposes? How can we dive into what that looks like and the why behind it? Would we consider them? We talked a little bit about the distinction between a stakeholder and a partner in this data work, and really trying to be clear about what that would look like and where there may be opportunities to align data investments beyond state agency work or state agency budgets. So that is also something that we're thinking about. And then I think the next slide is a little bit of an initial timeline for our work. So it's April, which is Child Abuse Prevention Month, in case for those who are not familiar, but I hope you all are. So we're going to spend some time this month really reviewing previous stakeholder feedback. So there have been a lot of already existing surveys and outreach and other work that's been done, including with the development of the Texas Early Learning Council's strategic plan. And so part of what we, and by we, I mean really Chelsea and Megan, are going to help us do and dive into is pulling some of that together and figuring out what of our previous stakeholder engagement work can we use as a starting place, as a kickoff to some of what we want to learn. We're really going to we're going to use that work and work with this group to refine some of those policy questions and potential use cases. So essentially, what questions are we trying to answer? What problem are we trying to solve here? And we're going to spend some time in our May meeting talking about that, including, I think this would be a great part of that meeting, talking through both previous stakeholder input and the existing data inventories. In June, we're going to share some of that initial information with agency leadership and get some initial feedback. And then July is when our next Texas Early Learning Council meeting is. And so the hope is that we can do some work over the next 3 months so that we will have something, not necessarily a full roadmap or recommendation, but some initial information to share with the Early Learning Council at that July meeting. That will then inform and shape and finalize the stakeholder feedback initiatives that we'll conduct through the fall, or I guess through late summer. I don't know how you define the August through September, because really it's still 100 degrees outside. So I think that's summer. But that would be the time that we would conduct or do or reach out to ask the additional questions of stakeholders that we've defined and finalized through this process between May and July. And then we'll come together to reflect on that feedback, to identify trends, and to use that to inform the final roadmap that we will hand over to the Early Learning Council full membership in January of next year. So that's sort of what we're proposing as a timeline. Anything, Megan? What have I missed here? No. Okay. Any questions, concerns about the way that that's laid out?
Sarah, no concerns about the way it's laid out. I did have a question that popped in my head.
Yeah.
Are we defining early childhood birth through 5, birth through 8?
Well, can we haven't defined it? But I think
Okay.
I think that in the Texas Early Learning Council strategic plan, that plan I think focuses on children 0 to 8.
Okay.
But if we want to either prioritize or make a recommendation about places to start here as a part of our roadmap, I think that is something that we could do as a work group.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Sarah, this is Stephanie. And Howard, maybe this is something that you can provide an update on, but it sounds like there's going to be a preschool development grant birth through 5 again at the federal level. And so it might, we should just keep an eye on what the requirements would be, because maybe this process will really help the Early Learning Council, explore that opportunity and the state explore that opportunity. So as long as what we're doing is, might be helpful to that process, that would be great. Then we'd be in alignment.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stephanie. And we may even be able to use the work of this group and the roadmap as a part of the whatever proposal Texas may make to use some of those resources to invest in the what's next part. It's on our minds for sure.
Yeah, it was a challenge before with our previous proposal.
Yeah,
the fact that this work hadn't been done, so this is perfect timing.
Yeah, great. I think that is, I know we need to talk about meetings, but I think there's space for public comment, and I want to make sure that if there is any, Megan, that we take the time now to include it.
Thanks. Yeah, this is Megan Schneider. We did not receive any requests for public comment, but for those of you listening in, definitely welcome that in the future. And so you can do that by just emailing me and letting me know what agenda item you'd like to speak to, what organization you're from. And we would encourage you to do that for future meetings. I'll pass it back to you, Sarah. We didn't receive any today.
Okay. Okay, so we are going to talk about when we meet next. The next TELC council meeting is July 15th. So we are trying to do the work between now and then so that we have something to share. We were going to recommend that our group meet monthly prior to that, although I would like to reserve the right to communicate by email in the in-between parts of the meeting. But we're hoping that we'll meet once in May and once in June to refine our recommendations. I think Chelsea is going to follow up to manage schedules and help wrangle us all together. And then once we have that, the meeting dates and agendas will be posted on the TELC website just for transparency. I might recommend, and I don't know if you guys, how you guys feel about this as a part of our core group, but as we work into May and June, that we might consider a 90-minute meeting versus a 60-minute meeting, only because I think that will be the time where we're really gonna, this was really an overview of where we were and where we're going, and we didn't really dive deeply into any of the specifics, and there wasn't a lot of presentation and questions, but I have a feeling there will be in May and June. So I'd like to recommend maybe that we just add a little bit of time to our time together in those 2 months. All right, hearing no objections.
Yeah, no objection.
I'm gonna take that as a yes.
I was looking for my thumbs up thing and I don't see it, so I'll give you the real one.
I, for one, am really excited about this. I know this has been a bit of a slow and steady journey as a state as complex and large in scope as Texas, with a really unique set of both really decentralized data and also really centralized data in these giant systems. Even though we can look to these other states for things that they've done, there is no other state that's quite set up the way Texas is, and that has provided its own set of unique challenges. And yet, I think there has been and is growing agreement among our agencies and our partners and stakeholders that we would be better served if we could figure out a way to be more intentional about the way that we align our data or understand our data, if we were more clear about what questions we wanted to ask and how we were getting the answers to those questions. And so I really am very excited for us to come together as a group and think through some of that and really make some strong recommendations, both to the Early Learning Council, but also potentially to some of our state agency leadership about how this might happen and where we might invest dollars to get the most bang for our buck. So I'm really appreciative of your time and your partnership and excited to do this work together over the coming months.
Thank you for leading, Sarah and Megan.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to the work.
All right, so if there are no other comments or questions, I'm going to take that as a win and in 4 minutes early for this first meeting. I hope that will give us some grace when we run over in the future meetings, which I anticipate we might. And so thank you, Megan and Chelsea, for keeping me organized and on track. And I'll look for an email from Chelsea with some information about planning and scheduling for these next 2 meetings.
Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys.
Bye, you guys. Thank you.
You get
so
lots of
much.
grace. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.